Hi everyone, it's Linda from Linda Z's in Arlington Heights, Illinois, and we are ready for coffee, and I need my coffee. I'm going to step right out. I'm going to be right back in. Normally I have it sitting right here. I thought I needed this right away this morning. I'll put it away now. So I hope you all have a cup of coffee, or if it's late at night, maybe a soft drink or something stronger, and you are enjoying the week. We are here to show you today some wonderful things about ByAnnie. I love ByAnnie herself. Annie Unrun is my idol. Her son is just an amazing man who is running all of her business. Annie, if you know her story, she's just truly a great lady. We have had her to the store many times. Many of you I know have done. Jill, I know you love it. I think Debbie and Sherry, I think you've been doing a lot of her ByAnnie bags too. Sue Ellen, I know you have because you've been teaching them. But today we are going to bring Jane in, and I'm going to give you a little bit of a tidbit of what she does, what Jane does with a ByAnnie bag. I think this will entice you to sign up for our ByAnnie Club. It is a wonderful club. You are going to get a very big special because of this video today, and you will be able to have 24, not 2, 24 videos. I hope this will help you. Enjoy this video. Jane is a marvelous teacher, and it's free. And then afterwards, click on our website. I'm sure there'll be a link or somewhere there where you can go ahead and sign up for the clubs. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great week. We'll see you next week.
Hi, I'm Jane Hunt, and this is Bags by Annie. And today's project we're going to be doing is called a case in point. It's ideal for the women who like to sew. Besides sewing, they like to knit or crochet. This little bag holds so much, and it is so convertible. I used a variety of several fabrics from Linda Z's that all coordinated, and they all work beautifully with the accessories and notions that you can get for Bags by Annie projects. The zippers, the mesh, the soft and stable. It's just wonderful working. One of the special things about this bag is you can totally customize it to the person or yourself who wants to use it. And to show you how customizable it is, let me show you that this little bag holds actually 65 years of collecting double point knitting needles. It opens with a double zip. It has a side front pocket for anything you just want a quick stash in there. And then you can open it up completely. It opens up flat. I created a special little pocket for mine because I have extra long double point needles that I have with a clear vinyl flip over cover. That's not part of the pattern. It's something I just dreamt up late at night when I was finally finished with the rest of the bag. But the bag itself has a pull-out pocket page that is held together with the double Velcro strip in the center. You see, this bag just flips down. And it has two outside vinyl pockets. Oof, I need more coffee. That can hold all your little sundries that don't fit in other pockets. And the mesh pockets are just perfect for those little kits that you get with several sizes of needles, whether they're hexagonals or double point round wood ones. They fit in so easily. These are the knitting needles that I use for all the socks I do and the fine knitting I do. And then outside, I customize my pockets to hold a needle gauge, a square ruler, a notepad, my small collection of crochet hooks that I use in my knitting projects to finish off things, and all of my metal double point needles that I was gifted in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. So what this bag holds is incredible. And the original pattern also has another outside pocket, a zipper pocket for information and to deal with. So let's get set up and get jumped into the project today. Now that we're kind of set up to talk about how we're going to sew and quilt up our fabric for our bag, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about all the wonderful notions and options you have in dealing with your bag choices. It doesn't have to look exactly like it is on the pattern or exactly as how we have sewn it up, how I have sewn it up for this for the class. You can use any myriad of colors and fabrics, and choices are just plentiful. I have a line of fabric that I have used here from the Linda Z store, but look, There's over 4 different kinds of zippers, color zippers that will work with it, and the mesh options that we'll use in the air really coordinate well. One of the things that you will want a lot for this bag is a very sharp pointed seam ripper to get in little places where you might have to do some nicking of threads if they show where you don't want them to show. There's also ability that there's a lot of thicknesses in the final steps that we will be trimming down on the outer edge, where we'll be layering our edges so that they will bind easier. And one of the best things to use to prevent hurting your project is a duckbill. Tulip Pink has 2 sizes of serrated edge duckbills available at Linda Z's, the 6-inch and the mini 4-inch. And I think that mini 4-inch is going to walk and go home with me today. I'm going to buy it myself. We will eventually be dealing with Velcro, and Velcro is always hard to pin in place before you sew it. So I would recommend using fabric glue. And there are 2 versions available at Linda Z's, the Quilter Select and the Sew Line. One of the nice things about it is they all come with refills for your pen. So you buy the pen once and buy refills, and the refills, each pen, each fill of glue stick lasts quite a lot as long as you immediately close it after putting the glue on. Another handy dandy thing to help you prevent from losing your zipper feet once you get them on the project is perfection tape, and I'll be demonstrating that later. And the Bags by Annie vinyl with for the pockets and such is a wonderful heavy gauge, and it's easy to sew with if you follow a few other hints, and we will be talking about that later. Always use a good quality of thread. For the project here for my decorative stitching, I've used Aurifil, but for some of the main bag construction, the final seams, I've used Metrosine. Metrosine is 100% polyester thread, and it's very strong. It's listed as 100 weight, so it's a fine thread, but it has this tenacity and the hold of a much thicker thread than you would think, and it makes it easy to sew through so many layers of fabric. Always a problem with keeping everything straight is what you have on your bobbin thread and what you have on your top thread. These little guys, bobbin holders, are wonderful when you're working on a single project to keep your bobbins in order and sorted and separated from where they might accidentally get the wrong shade of blue with another one. So these are the things I use. Now let's jump in and talk about quilting the project. So let's talk about the very first step on page 2 when you're talking about quilting up your project. I have done this project 3 or 4 different ways, and I want to give you some personal hints on it. One of the hardest things I discovered when I did my bag at home to practice on the pattern was I was going to lose a lot of my fancy quilting in the hoop because I was going to be covering it up with handles and outside pockets. I was just fortuitous that I had one quilting and hoop example that allowed me to show off one of my built-in embroidery programs in my Viking. So I then did a whole bunch of just straight line quilting where I used matching thread and chose patterns, either a wavy stitch or a very geometrical square rectangular stitch, diamond stitch, straight running stitch to do the quilting on their project. And it gives you a very subtle, very sophisticated look. But those of you who know me know I have an 890 Bernina serger that I just love experimenting with quilting on that. So I then took my third project, which we'll be working on in parts and parcels here, and did a cover stitch with a nice rayon embroidery floss as the part of the cover stitch, and I did a diagonal quilting on that. And it looks really great, but you've got to remember, all that quilting time you're putting into it will be subtly lost because it'll get covered up by vinyl, which makes the quilting almost disappear, or about a net mesh pocket. So it's hard to see that quilting. So when I realized that was going to be an issue for some of us, I said, okay, then I'm going to put all my effort in quilting and doing something fancy on the outside pockets. Like I did in my original one, I put all my efforts in doing different cover stitches and chain stitches and fancy threads on the outside pockets. So if you love quilting, you can do all over quilting, you're just fine. If you want to do more than one bag and do it as we did here, where we use one side out as the main fabric and then the other side is the lining fabric, or the opposite in the finished product, it's all up to you. You can easily get one whole bag out of the dimensions of the fabric you want. If you have access to a long arm and you just want to throw it on a long arm machine to quilt up your lining and your main fabric and your soft and stable, 1 yard will do 2 bags easily. A half yard will easily do 1 bag. So let's talk about the other parts as we move on. As always with Bags by Annie, she always tells you to make all the different pieces and parts. And then the last paragraph only, she tells you how to put it together, and they always go together beautifully. But let's talk about some of the very first steps in marking, because marking is very important in this bag, because you have to be dead on accurate, or the 2 sides, which are not connected until the very end, won't match up, won't even up, won't give you a square or a completed bag like this. So let's talk about marking. In there, she suggests using a chalk fabric marker or some other kind of marking pen that you will be able to see these measurements for the front and back and the pockets and placement. I recommend using a longer stitch, basting with either contrasting thread if you don't mind picking it out later on, or a blending thread, because it will virtually disappear in your project to do this, because after a while you won't be able to see where you marked your rounded corners here. If you can tell, one here is done in a contrasting thread and one is been chalked and it's completely gone with the chalk. You can't see it. So I always recommend to do your markings, whether it's vertical placement or such, in a longer stitch with a contrasting thread or a thread that blends that totally blends and will disappear in your project. So that's talking about quilting. Let's talk about the final markings. It is very, very important that your front cover and your back cover match perfectly, that they are the same shape, because that is the shape that you will see in the end project. Lay one on top of the other and make sure that you cut the same 10.5 by 10.5 on the other side, same 8 by 8.5 and such. As you can see, I'm slightly off on this piece. And so before I would go on to work on the other piece, I would trim it off to make sure that these 2 pieces are exactly alike. And you can see I did my marking with the basting lines for handle placement by using a blendable thread. It disappears virtually on both sides of the project. And we're going to be talking about that a lot. The first thing we do is she tells you to make your handles, and that's just wonderful. And one of the neatest things to use is a tube turner. It makes it fast, quick work. You're going to be putting the handles on your front and back pieces a long time right away, because they're going to be everything else is going to be done on top of them, and then they're going to be covered up with outside pockets. So this is how you do it. You draw the line 2 inches in, you stitch it in, you make your handles, and you place it to the inside of that line. Oops, wrong thing. And you use wonder clips because you're going quite a lot of thickness, and you place it and tighten it up position-wise. This is how I would do it roughly. To be more precise, let's talk about, where is it? Oh, here. When you sew these handles on, you're going to start at the top. You're going to go down, across, up, over, make the X, and then come back again. And so you're going to end up where you started. And for me, it's always easier to use a temporary line at this time and draw a line 1 inch down and then another inch down from there. And then I'm going to use whatever I can to help me guide me, so my X's on both sides of the project are the same and in the same place. So you're going to sew that, and I'm going to demonstrate that. Let's first mark it up with an inch and an inch and an inch. So I'm going to do an inch and an inch. And we're going to put it on the machine. Now for handles, I recommend that you stitch the handles themselves with a triple stitch running straight stitch. But to put them on the bag, because you're going to be sewing over and over and over them, I always used a single 3 millimeter long straight stitch. And let me make it just a little bit larger. And I use a, let's see, put up. Today I'm working on a 980Q Viking, which is really wonderful to deal with. And I'm going to use a different presser foot because I want to follow the exact lines that I created with my triple stitch on the handle, so that my attachment seams are completely invisible. And by using a guide, a stitch guide, you can really get that right into where you want to be. So, lining things up very carefully and putting my edge guide telling me where I should be about an inch down, and make sure I'm straight on that line. Yay, right there. I'm going to go needle down. And I'm going to sew straight down. I'm going to straight to the bottom. Needle down, turn. I'm going to sew straight across till I hit that mark where the edge of my seam guide is in the way, or is equal to it. And then I'm going to nudge my fabric over, get rid of the clip that I had in my hand, and now I said I'm trying to be as close to that seam line as possible because this is going to be covered up with a complete pocket on the back. But the neater you can make it. Now, me being me, I would go back and pick out those threads and go back and re-sew this line. But for purposes here, we just want to keep going so you can get the whole class in with all the tricks of the trade. You come up and you get right there. And now I'm going to sew down at an angle to where this line and that line magically match. And I'm going to turn the whole project around, come back till I'm in there, and we're going to go all the way over again to where the original stitch was, and I'm going to go back and finish off my box. And because that is probably one of the stress points of the bag on the handle, I'm going to sew back one more time. So I sew that top part of that X twice. Going to cut my threads. And I'm going to repeat it on the other part of the other side of the bag to over there. Remember, when placing your handle on the bag, you want to put the seam side of the handle. See if you guys can see this. The seam side of your strap facing down. So that's the nice side of the handle is facing up. Okay? Now we repeat it, and with the magic of television and everything else, here is our finished product. Both handles are in place. I have used perfection tape to mark the exact center from left to right of this bag for a future issue. Now let's talk about some of the other pieces that you will be putting together. Put this off to the side. One of the first things that you're going to be requested to do is you're going to be doing the zipper pockets and with binding on top and such. And we'll talk about that in a few seconds, in a few minutes. And you're going to be talking about the big pocket, the big outside slip pocket, and how to do that binding. We're going to do a special segment on reviewing binding at the end that talks about all the different places that you do binding and why you might bend the rules a little bit in those positions. One of the most important parts of this bag is called the side centerpiece. The side centerpiece is actually built to hold a little stabilizing pocket in here where you can put cardboard so that it's got a firmer base that always stand up. And believe me, when you put in all the knitting needles like I did in mine, that little extra support there is very nice because the bag does stand on its own without it, but it's handy in there. It's also the way you hold, here, let me open it up, the Velcro strips for the pocket page that you insert in here. And so you're going to do it in 2 different parts. I'm going to talk to you about it separately, but I want to talk about the initial construction of where you're doing the top layer, the pocket top of this layer. And what you're doing is you're cutting out a 3.5 by 6.5, I think it is, piece of fabric, and you're going to double fold a 1/4 inch over and fold it over again and top stitch it. And you're going to draw a line 1 3/4 down the center of it, or fold it in half, mark the center, and draw a line with your chalk wheel and center it. And then you're going to take 2 pieces of Velcro, the hooky stuff, the one that's rough, and you're going to center it on that seam, and you're going to use a glue stick and glue them down, and then you're going to sew across all the outside edges and the 2 inside edges of these 2 pieces of Velcro twice. This is going to make it extra firm. Now this Velcro is touching the hem of your top stitching for the opening of your pocket, and it's about 1/4 of an inch away from the bottom of this pocket, so that when you place it on the quilted piece that we will be talking about later, you're sewing it like this, and then you're folding it back over to place it like this so you have a finished seam. If that bothers you, you can just press under this seam and top stitch it too. But don't top stitch or sew over both ends because you want to get into this one side of the pocket. Now, in doing the pocket, she gives a measurement for the quilted piece that caused me some problems, and I want to suggest to you, instead of cutting it out to the size that they recommend, 3.5 by 6.5, I think that piece, make the quilted piece about 1 inch, 1.5 longer. And the reason why we're doing that is, where it is, here it is. When we get around to the final parts and we've connected everything together, if you see it like this, we can see the overhead, so I can point to what I'm talking about, Nick. All right, there. If you see it like this, these pieces are sewn together this way. And you start to see you're now going to have a seam on top of seam on top of seam. And then you're going to try to bind over all of this. So it is really important that this seam that you join the zipper to, the side, what opens up the bag, that seam is outside of these handles. Or you're going to be very careful and go very slowly because you will be going through almost 4 layers of soft and stable and about 8 layers of fabric, plus all the other stuff that you have in there, interfacing and such, and the pockets that are on the other side. You will be going through it quite a bit, and it's almost sometimes some machines find it difficult to deal with. If you hit a spot and your machine blah 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 or gets stuck in there, replace your needle. It's a guarantee that that needle has been bent in some way or shape, and it's going to hurt your machine. So if you get stuck at this point, replace your needle. It took me several tries to figure out what my problem was, and when I realized it, by just extending that base piece 1 inch, so I had some play here and here, I could put it in the place. And it's really important that you always figure out where the center is, because it's the center of the Velcro to the center of the bag. I don't think you can barely see that, but here, let's pretend that yeah. So you can see what I'm talking about. This would be going together like this. So it's important to know what the center of your Velcro is to the center of the bag, because that's where you're going to connect everything together. So I make this a little longer so I can play with it a little bit and customize my placement. If it were me and if you're having a lot of problems, I would just move the handles in 1/2 inch if you want to stick with the 6.5 inch piece. If you cut the 6.5 inch piece and say, oh crap, I'm going to have problems with that real thickness there, just move your handles over inside closer a 1/2 inch. So I added my 1/2 inch on the outside because by the time I discovered my mistake, I had everything connected and sewn together. So let's move on to the other pieces. The next major piece that we're going to be talking about making is the side panel and the zipper strip. Now, it is important that you understand that this piece is going to be trimmed. So you can be a little bit forgiving for yourself because you're dealing with 2-inch pieces on each side and you're adding the zipper into the middle. And the zipper in the middle is going to be, you're going to sew it face down, flip it over, and top stitch it over. Her instructions in the pattern are crystal clear, and I would be foolish to try to improve upon it. You just nail it down and put it like that. And as you do it, when you go around, I do recommend where she talks about sealing your edges. I seal my edges 1/4 inch seam, so I know that's where my seam line is. And then I go in 1/8 inch outside of that line, closer to the edge, and I do a second sealing of the seam. And if I'm really worried about thickness, I will go one where I'm dead on the edge and I'm just clipping the edge here. Just clipping it where I think it's going to be really bulky. The more you sew this down, the thinner it gets, and it gets easier in the final binding stage. So I have created my pocket, and I've got my zipper all ready. I'm going to connect, at this time, one side, and only one side. And I usually do the side with the pocket opening on it, so I know that that's the side I don't do any other top stitching over this line, because it's already connected. This is connected at a 1/4 inch seam. Once again, I'm using metrocene thread. I'm using a standard running stitch, and I'm using my seam guide, so I know I'm doing a 1/4 inch even. Where are you? Okay, we'll just change the position of the needle. That's a 1/4 inch. And off we sew. Oh, come on. Cut my thread. It's got all the same buttons as my Epic 2, but in different locations. Oops, I got it out of place. So I'm going to cut that because I don't want that to be crooked on the piece. This is one area where you have to be straight on your edges, and I should have taken time to line them up more perfectly. Okay, one more time. Edges all tight, everything in. Press your foot down, and off we go. Cut the thread. Because I have enlarged this major piece here, the little bindings that she recommends for is 1 3/4 inches. Sometimes you don't pull over and cover enough of what I want to cover. So I have experimented. I cut out 3 inches, and I just play with it until I get the coverage that I want. Because it's what we're going to do is bring it up. We're going to fold it up and over and stitch it down. So I have sewed it on the zipper side. Where are we? Sewed it on the zipper side. Now I'm going to lay it down, flip it over, and I would then tuck it in, and I'm going to top stitch that seam binding down. But first I would steam press this as flat as possible. So that would be the finishing on side. Now, in the book, in the pattern, she tells you to repeat it on this side. I strongly suggest this is where you stop, because in stopping here, you have all the ability to adjust, because by the time you get down around with all the other things, your sizes might change a little. You might sew one seam a little bit thicker, like a fat 1/4 inch, or it might be a scant 1/4 inch, and you might be off 3/8 of an inch by the time you get everything piecing. That's a lot of tearing apart that you can just correct by waiting a few more minutes before you do the other end. So we're setting that aside, and we're going to start talking about the pockets. One of the best pockets in the world is this zipper pocket, and her method of dealing with it is wonderful because it gives you a complete closed-in thing. I left this pocket open at this point in time, so we can talk a little bit later about how we're going to place it with that project. But let's talk about this cover and talk about the packs. Before you touch the outside pocket, you're going to have to deal with the inside pockets. On her pattern, she gave you all sorts of wonderful information and suggested sizes on how to make your vertical pockets. She gives you a whole list of different sizes so that you can put an item in each one of these and have plenty of room for the next item all the way down the line. Pretend that these are crochet hooks or knitting needles, or if you're a calligrapher and you like a pretty bag, you might have all your pens in there. So this is a way of dealing with it. I just love the idea that she stressed this is all original to you. Whatever sizes you want to make your vertical products, or how many you want to make, is up to you. So here is one I've marked up for a person who has a wonderful collection of paper cutting scissors. So she wanted one big enough for a little notepad, and then she wanted 2 that were about the same, and one for a stiletto that she used in her paper projects. So I took the measurements and I marked them down in here. This is how you do this seaming. The first thing you do is you do the stabilizer on the front part of the piece. It's 10.5 by 8.5, or it's something like that. You fold it in half, and then you do fusible woven interfacing on it. Bring it to it, and you stitch it down around on all three sides. 1/4 inch all the way around, and then I take a chance to do another sealing of the seam very close to the edge, because this is going to be a bulky connection at the very end, because when you bring all these pieces together, I do an extra one. And now I'm going to do the seams. Now the pocket holders, using the same running stitch I have marked with chalk, I go up 2 stitches off, turn around, 2 stitches back on, and all the way to the back. So all my threads are on this end. All my starts and stops are in the edge that's going to be covered by the binding. So let's put in these 4 pockets, one after the other. And this is one of the magic things about sewing machines with movable feet. You just keep on switching your feet and let your feet do all the work for you. Back to 0. One, 2, 3, 2, kinda. And then follow your track right back. Cut your thread. Oops. Knock everything over. Needle down. Needle down. There. Let's go. And on to the last one. spin it. Cut the thread. And there it is. There's your customized pocket ready for you to put the outside pocket on, which will cover up all those seam lines and you'll see that they're invisible. But one of the things I'm going to do first is I'm going to make sure with a pin I mark my center, lift my tape off, put the edges together. Now it's common because of how much work you've done. When you're working on quilted fabrics, sizes change. I can guarantee you that before I did all these seams, this piece was the same width as this piece. So this is the time where you take one edge and you just line it up, and you be very careful to clip it on your corners. And make sure you're straight across at the top. And since I'm going to start sewing on this edge, this is the edge I want to be careful with most because that will set the other edges. We're going to switch once again to an edge guiding foot. And we remove the needle over to 3, which is what I had it on before, to create a 1/4-inch seam. And we're going to put it right there on that previous seam line that I've already sewn. And we're going to sew down. Now, sometimes this thickness is getting a little on the heavy side, so this is when I take the stiletto, which I really like by Bags by Annie. It's one of my favorite tools. I have one in every sewing box, by every sewing machine, and every serger. And you just help it a little bit get over that lump. Cut the thread. Check to make sure it hasn't shifted anything on the other side, and that looks really right. And now I'm going to go down. I think I'm going to do this side first, the other side first, just because it's kind of on the thick side, and I know I'm a little long on one side. So I'm going to actually set it on the 1/4 inch, not on the outside edge, because that would be what I'm going to be trimming off. I'm doing it on the inside edge because that's what the length is going to be. I want to make sure everything's being held flat, and off we go. Whoops, arguing with my wonder clip. And then, because I have my pin marking my outside edge, I want to put my tape back in so I can remove the pin so there's no doubt where my outside center is, the back center is rather, and off I sew again. Cut my thread. Now, this is again another checkpoint that I think is very important for you to look at this point in time, is to make sure before you start trimming anything off, yeah, it happened on the same one. Notice, after I put it on all the pockets on this side, it also was shrank to the same length, the same width as the piece that we just worked on. So it's always important to keep checking to make sure that these two pieces, the front cover and the back cover, remain the same size. And we'll just trim that off on a rotary cutter when we get to that part in the situation. So this is, now we're back to when we're talking about zipper strips. And it's very important that you understand that when we start measuring zipper strips to side strips, we're going to use a lot of wonder clips, and we're going to do it over and over and over a time to see exactly how easy and what we got to get together. This will be clips so that pieces are met this way to this way. So we have to make sure we got the same measurement center point on it. And this is, you know, a journeyman's way of doing it. Where is the pin? There. For right now, I just need a pin. Make sure I am in center. I can always find my center again by folding my piece together to see if I got my center right. Yep. I'm going to put, since we're doing all our demoing on this piece, put that piece aside. I'm going to put my arrow there so I can always find it. I love perfection tape. It just holds so well. And we're going to find the same center of this piece. Remember, I said center of the Velcro. And I'm going to mark it with a pin. So, with the right sides together, we're going to clip those two. Now, if I measured going out on the square, I'd be in a problem because that takes up more fabric. So what you have to remember at this time is that at least the 4 corners on the piece that you're using to test your zipper strip has to be trimmed. Let me get back, trim my corners off, and I'll get back to you. So I've trimmed off my corners. And in trimming off my corners, I realized, oh, I got to reseal those ends. It's very important that you reseal these ends before you go any further because it can change the dimensions of your bag. So I put it under the machine using the 1/4 inch guide that we just used before, and I stitch very slowly, keeping the guide very tight to that edge. And I will continue down. Yeah, let's make sure this is lying flat. There. Always go slowly over your zippers. Keeping the handle out of the way. Now I would go again and tighten up that seal on the seams because it's still puffy. So I'm going closer to the edge, same stitch, easy enough to round. Sealing these seams is incredibly important because of how many thicknesses you're trying to sew through. It will make your life so much easier. Ask me how I know. Okay, cut the thread. Okay, we're going to find the center of your side centerpiece, the big piece, but we're looking for the center of the Velcro. We don't care how much is on either edge of this. We want to know the center of the Velcro. Easiest way to do it is find it, pinch it, and put a pin where you can see it. I then take a piece of perfection tape, and I have it somewhere here. Perfection tape, there. Because you're going to do this a couple of times. So you want to be able to see it while you do the measurements on this. And I'm going to draw a line on it, so I know exactly where my center is. And I can take my pin out so I know it's not in any harm's way. So, where's the, oh, did I lose my, I lost my tape. Okay, we have to find the center again. And like I said, all you do is pinch it. Helps you check to see if your ends are rounded and even. Need a little trim here. Find my center again. Put tape down. Oh, I taped the other one. I guess it's the other one I taped. And draw a line. Oops, that's not going to draw a line, but this will. Okay. Now we're going to take with the wrong sides together, because this is an outward facing seam. We're binding the seam so the seam shows on the outside. Here. So the seam shows on the outside. So we have wrong sides together, matching up our two center pieces, and we start with Wonder Clips, and we clip all the way around. I tend to do it on a flat table, standing, gives you a break from sitting down all this time. And we clip the side that's already sewn. It has a piece that's been sewn down. We clip that down. And what we're doing is trying to find our circumference, because our circumference has changed from our original cut. I also at this time tend to stick my handles inside any pockets. It keeps them out of the way while you're sewing in the future. Keeps them out of the way. And you actually are going to be pretty heavy on the clipping around these corners, because you're going to be manipulating a lot of thickness. And as you can see, the thickness is growing. Now we've got 3 layers going at this point, and we haven't even hit a handle yet. And you're going to go all the way around, kind of on the quick side, making sure you're matching your edges. As you can see, they're matched all the way around here. One thing that's nice about these Wonder Clips, they actually hold the pieces of fabric together as if they were sewn, not like a pin, which can bend with the stress of the fabric. I thought at first, when I first tried Wonder Clips, oh, I'd try a package of 10. Well, I think I've got now 3 packages of 50 somewhere in my house or on projects. They are so wonderful. Hence the name Wonder Clips, huh? Hence the name. Get that outside of the handle. Now I'm not sewing at this point in time. I'm just measuring so I know where to finish off my strip. And you can manhandle this. You can manhandle this fabric at this point in time, because you're going to be manhandling it when you're in this underneath the sewing machine. Presser foot, needle. And you're going to get all the way around, because it's really important that you measure these corners take up a lot of space. Now, let's see how would be the best way to show it. You can see now I'm already overlapping the centerpiece. So we want to make sure we are outside the handles before we mark the seam. And it looks like we're right. It's just dead on perfect if we mark for a 1/4 inch seam. So in marking that 1/4 inch seam, let's see if I can show it like this. See the edge here? I want them to be sewn a 1/4 inch inside there. So I have to add a 1/2 inch to this piece to the length beyond where it matches, so it can be a seam and fold back. So what I do is I reach for a pin, make sure everything's standing up straight. I don't have any gaps. And I pin where they meet. And I add a 1/2 inch onto this. So now I come out. There's my pin, and I want to be 1/2 inch out, so when allowed to cover for the seam allowances I'm going to be using there. So love Quilter Select because they don't slide on the fabric. And also what's great about this double zip, you can take the zipper and get it out of your way and still keep everything nice and closed. So I want to be a 1/2 inch beyond that point because I want to allow for the seam allowance, and I want it to be straight. So now I go back to the machine, put right sides together, do a 1/4 inch seam, and finish my loop. Now, just because I have been known to slip and make mistakes on measurements in my lifetime, I turn around and do another pinning where I pin it together like I would sew it before I put the seam binding on this side and finish the seam bindings in case I have to adjust on either side. I do one more time where I pin it together with the wrong sides together and go all the way around to make sure it fits. Through the magic of taping, I've already gotten that done. But there is another project step that I want to talk about at this time, and that is binding. Binding is always a challenge. Let's see if I can get this back out of the way. It's always a challenge on bags because you're going around very tight corners and such like that. And sometimes it's an additional stitch that you need for the strength of the bag, the holding the bag together. We're using metrocene polyester thread on this bag in these vital parts, so it's very held together very strongly. So I'm looking for something that's going to make it easier for me to deal with in the long run. And this is my little trick of the trade. Now, Sue Ellen, who also teaches Bags by Annie Club sessions, she does it the other way, and her binding is always perfection. It's always perfection. For me, binding is probably my least favorite part of the job. And it's a challenge. I blame it on my eyesight, but actually it might be my patience too. It's very important that it works because it's the first thing you see on a bag and it's the last thing you do on the bag. So it's always do your binding where you're a little bit relaxed after having another cup of coffee or such. And Annie has written several instructions on it. This is a hack that I use that I found on a user website, and I have adjusted it for my own personal idiosyncrasies of what I have trouble with. So I am going to demonstrate it, but since I don't have my bindings completely done on both sides, I'm just showing you what I do at this time. The first thing I do is I take off and expose my free arm and set it aside. I usually keep my binding on empty spools of thread, serger thread or whatever I'm having in, so it's easy to unravel and keep on the floor beside my feet without it going everywhere in the world. my cat at home thinks that anything I put on the floor is fair game, and so I've been known to have binding wrapped around my chair so tightly I can't move. So this is how we deal with it. Pretending that the binding strips have been top stitched down and look really good, and everything is neat. You fold your binding, working from the outside of your project. You know where the middle of your project is. You find the other side, and then somewhere along the middle side of it, you start on the middle side. You don't start at either the center on either the bottom or the top, but somewhere in the middle, you're going to put your binding on top. And this is how I handle it. I place my one open binding open like this, and then I fold over one corner to make a triangle like a bias binding seam. And I finger press it kind of on the sharp side to keep it in place. And if you're having a little trouble with it because you're working on something that's kind of spongy, you take 2 straight pins, you pin it where you're going to put the fold over. It helps you create that sharp point over on that one edge, and you're going to pin it there. So you're pinning down this triangle. You're pinning down this triangle. And without trying to bleed on your project. Okay. Put it underneath your machine, which you've set up for a 1/4 inch. Put it under the machine with the point right here. It's going to be underneath the presser foot. Drop your presser foot, drop your needle, and you're going to sew about 2 inches. Fold with that point down. It's important to get past this fold before you stop. So I'm going to sew another inch, and I'm going to stop, cut my thread, take it out of the machine. I'm going to press a sharp fold on that, fold it over, and now I'm going to flip it over, line up my raw edges, go back underneath the machine, starting a little ways below where that flap is, not where just a little bit ways beyond that. So it's still loose under there. Down again, and off to the races we go. We're going to just wrap this edge all the way around in the loop. Now, if you were doing this traditionally, you would have 6 inches of extra binding loose on the other side. So when you come around and join it, you can join it in any traditional way. But this is how I do a fast trim, a fast binding that usually works, usually being the operative word. And you go all the way around. You go all the way around. Yeah, today is one of those first really frigid, cold days here in Chicago. And I'm complaining about the heat in the studio. This is a little on the slow side, so bear with me, because it's the magic of the joining is what is so nice on this. Now you're getting to some places where you're going to have some heavy seams that fold over from the zipper strip to the side panel. And so when you get to those places, just slow down your speed. You don't have to go like a you-know-what out of hell. Or, you just have to just relax and enjoy it. and just keep on sewing. Everything is finished on the inside, and this is going to make the final bag construction so easy. But there's another cheat coming in down the line too. That little squishy is me sewing the pressure foot going over the Velcro strips. Chunk, 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 chunk. Now, I'm looking at seeing what we're coming up. We're coming up to the part where we left open. If you can see it here. It's opened here. So I'm going to measure myself maybe an inch past that opening. I'm going to take my scissors, cut off my binding. And you'll notice this is a lot less binding loss when you, instead of doing the 6 inches up and all that business. And see if I can't tuck it in there. No, I got to cut off just a hair more so it fits right up to that point where I started the seam. And I snug it up a little bit. I actually pull on it just a hair to make sure it fits tightly. And this is the time where you might want to use a clip or two to hold it while you do the final tuck in. And I'm now tucking it inside that little V, that little quarter angle I did. And I'm tucking it in so it makes a nice tight fold line. And I keep pulling on the unsewn part until I get it nice and tight, fit in. And this is how Annie's stiletto, it just works a miracle in this part. It just is a nice tight fold in. Pull it tight, make sure it's in there as snug as I can. I'm going to clip that end and I'm going to sew right over that edge, knowing that this is not going to be in the seam line. The seam line is the edge of the softened stable, so that the lines should just match perfectly. Cut my thread. So we now have a smooth join of our binding that if you really want to, you could hand whip stitch later. I often, by the time you get it sewn on the other side, it's pulled so tight, you can't tell that it's not a seam. Let's see if you can see that. It gets pulled so tight, you can't tell that it's not a regular seam line. Can you see that? So you do this on both sides. I would tend to stagger. If I did one join here, I would do the other join and on the opposite edge. If I did one join here, I would do the other join on this side on the opposite edge, just so it's not so visible that you see it always on the same side. Now, we're going to go to the magic television, again, or taping. I'm going to undo myself here from my binding. And we're going to go and see the final join on the other page. We sew, when we sew this to this page, like I said, we put wrong sides together, and we sew it on with the big flat side down. Because the binding is already on there, we don't have to worry about it getting caught or getting in wrinkles, unless you got really creative like that. And at that point, you bring the binding up and over. And this I'm not going to demonstrate because everybody knows how to do this. We're going to then flip the project over, put contrast thread in the in the needle and in the bobbin, and you're going to pull your binding strip over with your stiletto, and with a large stitch like 4.5, 4, no smaller than 4, but 4.5 or 5, you're going to pull it over and you're going to neatly stitch as in a uniform edge to the edge all the way around. And you will find places where it's going to be really tight for you to deal with, and you're going to have to push and pull and just go slow, stitch, stitch, stitch around all the way around. Now, if you turn that over, you're going to see spots where your stitching has gone way into your bag. Can we see that? You can see where the stitching has gone way into your bag. There, I thought I used a bright enough thread, but maybe not. It's into the bag, and that to me is noticeable. So I prefer a very smooth finish. So at this point in time, I would turn the bag flat side down, use my stitch in the ditch presser foot, and I would sew right in the middle of that, and then pull out those threads while watching TV. It will give you, if you use a blendable thread, you will not be able to notice the difference between your fold over edge, but the outside of the bag is completely clean. Where am I? There. In this method allows me to give you a completely clean outside. You don't see that seam line, and since the fold over edge is on the walls of it, you don't notice the difference of what you have between the two places. It's invisible. There are people who can stitch it once and do it fine, but I was finding I was spending as much time readjusting my binding on the outside of the bag over and over and over again. So let's do a quick demo on how you actually join this to the other page. Where's my other page? Ah, there it is. Once again, we have to do rounding of corners, and you can do it either of two ways. You can use a circle that allows you to square up your edges, and with a rotary cutter, just cut very carefully around. And I'm telling you, it's thick, so you have to work on it. And it might not be as clean as you want. Make sure you don't get the pockets caught in. Line up your edges, create your 90-degree angle. So that I use a 3.5 inch circle because I like the rounded shape a little bit better than a 2.5. She often recommends doing a 2.5, but I just like the 3.5. It's just a little easier for me to negotiate around when I'm using my 9mm sewing machine. Presser feet make it a little easier to get around on it. Don't like the looks of that one. I might have to trim that up by hand. Let's try that one more time. Yeah, that was that edge. You can hear me going through all those layers. So once again, then you always, when you do a curved seam, you compare your corners and make sure they look the same on both sides. And you often trim them up to match each other. Always cut away from your fingers, not towards your fingers. That's one of my standard lectures, because the worst injury I ever suffered is when I went right into the space between my thumb and my forefinger. So if one corner is a little odd, it's best to have both corners look odd and the same shape as so that it's not noticeable. This is the final shape of your bag, and you want your corners to match as much as possible. So let's take a break right now, and I will seal my corners and wonder clip this together, and we'll show you the final sewing. Okay, we're getting ready for the final binding. We've already bound one side. We've already flipped the binding over and did with the basting stitch, and we stitched in the ditch. Remember to put your handle inside the pocket so it won't get caught during anything you're sewing. And you can see from the way I have manhandled this project, it has been bent over and such, making it easier to sew around. So the second piece should be really easy. The one thing to remember is stick your handle in. Don't get it all the way down to the bottom because you could accidentally sew it into this first seam. And to remember, you're always putting the inside to inside, matching up that center line, the line I've got drawn here with the pin I have here. And you're going to sew it so the big piece is on the bottom. So that's the way I would recommend clipping it. So I'm going to put 2 clips here. Here is another hint. I currently have the zipper strip, side strip, closed on this one. Doing the second piece, it's easier to do the first piece with the zippers all together. Both sides of the zippers together. Doing the second piece, open it up, because you're dealing with half the bag that way, and when you're pushing it through and under the machine, and you can flip this out of your way. So I unzip it and I start dealing with these thick seams. This is the seam I warned you on. You want to sew very slowly and easily through these seams. Using your, if you can, before you even start, steam press your edges as hard as you can flat and let it get to that point. Reseal it with an extra stitch or 2 of going around outside edging, but just being very, very firm with it. You're going to really keep it in its place. And you're going to stitch around, getting this out of your way as much as possible. Otherwise, you're folding over everything and it just feels like the bag is bigger than you are. And you notice this is where my binding is. So I see the binding when I'm sewing it together. The binding is not hidden from me. And there's only one line of seaming there. So you know that is the line that you want to follow with your sewing machine. That is your 1/4 inch seam. And these are very big seams around here, especially when you've got the pocket, the zipper pocket, the bindings and edges. You just go around and clip. For time's sake, I'm going to just clip around this corner to demonstrate how you sew around a corner. And then we are going to break away and talk about some other things like the pocket page. Okay. We're pretending I've got it all clipped around the whole thing. I'm only going to show part of it because this is really the important part to go on. Because my hands are going to get busy, I'm going to take my jewelry off so it doesn't bang while I'm trying to talk. You're going to line your edges up and you're going to put them in, and you're aiming for the same seam line that you saw. Where is my stiletto so I can point it? You're aiming your needle to land in the same spot or just to the left of it of what you have on, you attached your binding to your side strip. So there's my seam line. I'm dropping my needle, and my needle is dead on, right onto that line. And you're going to sew, manhandling. See how easy it is to get this out of your way? Now you only have one part of the bag to worry about at a time. And it probably would work better if I had the extension table inside there. It gives me more of a working base. There. More of a working table. And I'm leaning, keeping my edges even. And you kind of want to see just a smidge of the bottom base edge there, just a smidge. So you know you're getting through both pieces, and you're going to go. And just as you did before when we were going around sealing the edges, you're going to keep your edge guide as close to the edge at all times as you go around the corner. You want to slow down your speed and follow around, taking things out. Now this is called stitch and fluff too, where you take 3 stitches and you fluff the excess out of your way. If you have old-fashioned sewing terms these days, I kind of like to collect them. There's always fun things to learn about it. And then get around the corner. You straighten it out and bring it back with a stiletto. Poke it down. Your stiletto is your movable pin. Always stop with the needle down in the down position and work your way around. I always like to start on a side that doesn't that has as few thicknesses as well, just so you get in the habit of handling your the bag and working just slowly and consistently all the way around. And then line up the edges, line up at the thing, and just keep going. Now, when you come to where your joins, that little pocket that you created might get caught on your presser foot. Just move your presser foot up, push it under just like I did, and keep on sewing. Now, this is the part that's always difficult on this bag, and this is going around after you've got one side done and you're going around slowly and you're hitting all the big seams on the bottom connection. Just take your time. Don't take your eyes off of your project. Don't answer the phone. They'll leave a message. At this point in time, I say, if you're not bleeding or in imminent sense of death, leave me alone for 4 minutes, and you should be able to get through it. So far, nobody's complained. And I'm hitting all this big major seaming over here, so it is important that you get everything lined up. Take your time. There is no rush here. There is no minimum speed requirement. Just keep on forcing it over a little bit at a time. That sounded like I was not taking my time there, didn't it? And just keep working it over around that corner. Now, you might have trouble with a zipper at this point, and so you might want to move it out a little bit. I don't like zippers flapping around when I'm at this close to the needles, so zipper pulls actually. And you just go around, take a couple stitches, readjust, take a couple stitches more. Readjust. Now I'm going to hit this straight. Now you notice you're going to be going through straps, the side panel, the zipper panel, pockets, outside pockets. So this is the time to just take your time. Get the blade over. It helps because you have that line on your binding. It's just only one line of sewing that you can see. It tells you exactly where you're at. And we'll cut here so you can see the results of your work. There. Now, this is all the seams have been sealed, but because of the different sizes and the trims we had to make along the line adjustments, I would probably go back and seal those seams again, or using a duckbill scissors. Let's see if I have one around here that I can demonstrate how to use. We just had one. Duckbill. Yeah, those are fine. They're not the pretty ones that I want to take home, but they'll be just fine. All right. When you're using a duckbill, you want to cut with the fat blade down against the project. It prevents you from cutting into any of the fabric you want to keep. So I want to keep this protected. So instead of cutting like this, like I was almost going to do, which could nick my fabric, I'm going to do it this side. So the duckbill is down against the fabric and it won't let me cut any further. And I will just trim off or layer or bevel that edge a little. I've not endangered any project. Bring it over and then you see that I can actually get the binding to come across. Now the toughest part will be these corners where everything is so congested. So you might have to do it a little bit more. And once again, the duckbill is against the fabric that you want to protect. That's the outside of the bag. And you clip just a little. If you have to go back and clip more, that's fine. Start little. it's easier to take more off and then to try to put it back on. And there you go. That's how you do it. And when you put it in the machine, just top stitch it with contrast thread, or you can toss the dice and do it with regular thread. I would switch feet to a center guide foot so you know exactly where your foot, your needle is going. I'll just quickly demonstrate it with this lovely orange thread. Most of my friends will note that I'm sewing with orange, not yellow, because yellow is not my favorite color to wear, so I don't enjoy usually sewing with bright yellow, but there are cases where bright yellow and bright orange are very well needed, and that is when you're doing marking threads or just internal basting. I want to, whoops, I got the thread caught in there. I'm going to change my stitch length to a 4.5 because I want this very big. And I'm going to be on 0 position with the needle. This is the one time you want to be really tough with this. And you're going to put it in. Sometimes it's easier on tables where you have some tabling. Yeah, there. We'll get it over on one of these sides. You've trimmed it. You've sewn it in. And you're going to put it under there. And using the guide foot, I'm going to bury my needle. And with my stiletto, I'm very carefully going to pull the fabric over and try to sew a consistent, we got an audience. It's consistent basting thread around. And since I'm using such a big stitch, it will go really quick all the way around. So I know I've caught my fabric, the binding on both sides, once by the seam and once by this thing. I then turn around, switch back to my good thread, the very good thread, and know if I have sewn consistently. I should check to see if I pulled over my fabric far enough on this one, because you can see that the basting stitch is way inside on top of the binding. So I check it over and say, oh, if I'm just a little bit to the right of that, I will be okay. To the left of that. Bury again, put my needle into the ditch, and then I sew in the ditch all the way around. All the way around the bag. This is just a demo for this little bit because we're running out of time. And there you'll see that one thing is on the other. By having a contrast thread in your bobbin and in your needle thread for that basting stitch, it's easy to pick that out while you're watching TV. And that gives you a finished bag when we get it all sewn together. Can you see that? The finished bag will look like this when it's all sewn together, all the pieces together. We also have a final piece in here called the pocket page. The pocket page is interesting that it's almost a secondary project, and its binding is a little bit different than that of any of the other bindings because you're going to be sewing over vinyl. You only want to sew vinyl once in the same spot, not twice, because that makes a perforation and it'll rip out on you after a little bit. So when they say follow the general binding recommendations for binding in the pattern for the vinyl pockets that you've created here, it's important for you to think twice. General binding tells putting things on the wrong side of the fabric and folding it over to the right side where you want it to look pretty. Always consider you want to bind from the back onto the, do your final stitching on top of your vinyl so that you only have to stitch it once and not go back and correct it because you didn't catch the edge. This is the time where you really follow and just catch the edge. And I've sewn it on, I folded it over, I'm bringing it back under the stitch. I'm going to drop my presser foot. I'm going to adjust my needle position either right or left, depending on what I want. There it is. And sew an even stitch in the correct thread down this line all the way around. I've only sewn twice through my vinyl, once to put the binding on and once to finish the binding, and it's at different positions. So you will see this stitch on the back side. So on your bobbin thread, you will want to use a blending thread. Like on this one, on this page, I would probably use the blue because it will be invisible. As you can see, the blue thread is almost invisible on top of the mesh. On the top, I would probably use blue too because it will make it invisible at this point in time. But it finishes it off perfectly. One other trick to remember, let's get this up, on the mesh pocket is that you're doing 3 measurements on this project. You're doing the middle. When you first mark, you're doing the middle, and then you're doing once on each side a half down, and that is to place the mesh pockets. So you can keep the mesh pocket straight because mesh stretches and it's easy and forgiving and such like that. It gets sewn down on the sides here, and you use that line to keep it straight across when you sew your edges on this side. You place the Velcro first, just like on the pocket page, the center side pocket. Draw a line down the middle, 2 pieces, and this time you use the soft stuff, not the scratchy stuff, the soft stuff. Place 4 3/4 or 5 3/4. I mean, it's the measurements are in the pattern, and you sew across and around and down the middle twice. That will make it nice and firm. Because it's covered up with a mesh, you don't even see the seaming on this side. And then when you put the vinyl pockets on it where you have the binding, that seam is right here and creates the natural fold for the page. So you'll get everything put together like that, like we've been talking about. You put your project page in there and you are done. Happy sewing.